This is the most top rated movie on IMDb.com, and it probably has one of the most satisfying endings of any movie. So today we're going to paint the Shawshank Redemption. Okay, before we get into this movie, the beginning of this painting was actually a lot of fun to do because it was a good learning experience for me. Being new to watercolor, I've said this before, but I didn't know how am I going to paint this scene with rain. Like, how am I supposed to visualize the rain? And luckily, I had just purchased a book about watercolor, and there was a little lesson on how to make snow with watercolor. And I was like, well, maybe that will work. Maybe it will look like water if I put it on a water scene. I can fool everyone. So you take salt, everything's still really wet, and you just sprinkle salt over your wet canvas. And you can see like where it gets really dark, where the salt lands, all that paint is being sucked into the salt. So cool. And it's gonna dry, and when it's dry, it looks like this. You just brush off the salt, and you can carry on. So what I did was I did another layer because it wasn't the right color. I wanted it darker. So I did another layer of paint, and then I will do the salt again just add another layer of that water. And I think it turned out really cool. Like, I know it's not perfect, but it's really cool, and it was a really cool method. So let's talk The Shawshank Redemption. It came out in 1994, starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. And this was based off of a short story from Stephen King, which I have never read. I still have never read. And I can only imagine that this really has to be better than the Stephen King short story. I know a lot of people love Stephen King, but I'm not a huge fan of Stephen King. I have read his short stories, which are much more palatable to me than his novels, but that's just my opinion. If you don't know the basic premise, this man was convicted of murdering his wife and her lover, and he gets put in Shawshank prison, and he becomes friends with one of the other inmates, Morgan Freeman's character, who's Red. And yeah, it's an interesting story about surviving this system and how to survive it when you know in your heart that you're innocent. So this scene is like, this movie came out in 1994. So if you haven't seen this, please just stop watching and go watch the movie, and then you come back to this video. But this scene is so important, and because it's been working up to it. We didn't know exactly how this was going to play out as a viewer, but it's so satisfying watching Andy crawl through this tunnel and break out of this prison, and it's raining. He just crawled through poo, and the rain is literally washing not only that, but all the years of anguish off of him. And it's so joyful, and you're so relieved when it happens, and it's so satisfying. It's one of the most satisfying endings I can think of for most movies. What's funny is I watched this movie growing up quite a bit. Not really growing up, but like later teen and 20s. Like this movie was on TV a lot. Maybe on like TNT, maybe. This movie was always on TV. I never owned it, so but whenever I came across it, just channel surfing, you'd stop and like this movie would suck you in a minute. And I watched it so many times just by coming across it by chance on cable TV. I do own it now, but that's how I constantly watched it growing up. So I've met a lot of people that I've asked what their favorite movie is, and a lot of people have said Shawshank Redemption, and you can't fault them for that. This movie is the top-rated movie on IMDb. I get to think that there's thousands and thousands of movies on that database, and this is the top-rated one. And that's saying something for how much it resonates with everybody. I think it's on the short list of like movies that men are allowed to cry to. I don't know. I've heard stuff like that, like this movie and Field of Dreams, Old Yeller. I don't know if that's true. If there are men watching, you tell me. So this is not the end of the movie. There is still a little bit left, but because the very, very end of the movie, that's when the waterworks start for me. That's when I cry, because I love Morgan Freeman's character so much, and seeing him get a happy ending is really what you need. You can see in the painting here that because I'm not able to get too much detail, again, this is a very small painting, but I still want to get the look on his face, but I'm using the shadows to make sure you can see it. So to make sure you can see his nose and his mouth and him laughing, and I want you to see the joy in his face without me having to really zoom in on it. Can you believe this movie never won an Oscar? It was nominated for a bunch, including Best Picture, but it didn't win anything. Forrest Gump was its contender that year, and Forrest Gump won a lot. It won the Best Picture. It won. Tom Hanks won for Best Actor over Morgan Freeman. Like this, it was a tough year for anyone going against Forrest Gump. But yeah, I just could think of. I think it's also adapted screenplay it was nominated for, which also is a Forrest Gump win. Yes, it was. So, and I think people would argue that this movie holds up better than Forrest Gump does, and I do agree. Forrest Gump is in one of my favorite movies of all time because Tom Hanks is one of my favorite actors of all time, and that movie just brings me joy. I really like Forrest Gump, but this one is something special. I think this one holds a little more to it when it comes to maybe even like social commentary, the justice system, and how the world works in general. And yeah, I just think this one does hold up better than Forrest Gump. No offense to Forrest Gump fans, which is me. So as much as I love this movie, there is a scene I always skip, and that is the scene with Brooks. If you know, you know. I just can't do it. It's too sad. I always skip the scene with Brooks. I just can't do it. So right now I'm using a little bit of white gouache to fix little spots, like there was a thumb that was almost completely gone, so I filled in used some white gouache to complete his thumb and add a little bit of highlights where there'd be like a gleam from the light because he's being rained on, so it'll be wet, so just to make it look more shiny and wet. this was probably the first set of hands I ever actually painted the full hands, so try again. Right, different lighting situation is probably a different day. Just adding little tiny details to close up everything to make sure everything looks good. There's no standing things that will bug me later. And as we're wrapping up this painting, be sure to subscribe. Leave your comment about what you think of this movie. Is this one of your favorites, as well as many, many others? And what you would like to see me paint next. I do have some that are already painted that I just need to finish uploading, but I love getting ideas. You can follow me also on the other channels, Instagram, TikTok, Nicole Buckley Art, everywhere I go. So this is it. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Before the tape peel, after the tape peel, where I see all the bleeding that happened. Oh no.